Stepping out of my car and into the cold stillness of the forgotten parking lot, I felt an eerie pressure in my chest, as if the air itself remembered what once stood here far better than I did. And as the weak evening light stretched across the broken pavement, I saw it, the abandoned Blockbuster, its faded blue and Delo sign barely clinging to the facade, one last gasp of a decade long gone. Poe! And instantly I felt myself pulled back into the world of my childhood nightmares. Those late 90s and early 200s days when renting a horror movie wasn't just entertainment, but a direct invitation to terrify yourself for a whole week, because you knew once you rented that tape, you had to live with it until it was returned. And before going in, I turned to the camera and said softly, "This isn't just nostalgia. This is where my first real fear was born." Letting the hook settle in just like the cold wind that whistled through the empty doorway. And as we crossed the threshold into total darkness, my flashlight flickered in a way that felt almost intentional, illuminating rows of dusty aisles that seemed to lean toward me as if they had been waiting years for someone to return. The silence inside thick and strange, like a place that had been paused rather than abandoned, as though time in this building hadn't moved forward with the rest of the world. The smell of old cardboard, sun-damaged plastic, forgotten carpets, and something else, something faintly metallic, floated through the stagnant air. And with every step, I took deeper into the store. Memories pushed their way to the front of my mind, not warm, happy ones, but the sharply vivid flashes of moments I wished I could forget. The VHS covers that shook me, the ones I couldn't look at without feeling like the characters on them were looking back. The posters with art so disturbing that as a child I would try to avoid making eye contact with them, convinced they would somehow follow me home. I whispered into the camera. This place used to be loud, full of kids shouting, parents arguing about late fees, the beeping of scanners. Now, it feels like the store is holding its breath. And when I reached the first aisle and brushed aside the thick layer of dust on the display rack, I realized the cases hadn't moved in years. Some still stacked the way employees left them on the final day the store closed, as if everyone expected to return the next morning to keep renting tapes. And the uneasy stillness wrapped tightly around my shoulders like a too familiar memory. Then the real tension hit when I saw it, the first VHS cover that once haunted me as a child, a faded, sun-bleached copy of Child's Play, the cracked plastic sleeve creating a warped reflection of the doll's face, and instantly I felt a cold ripple run down my spine, remembering the night when I was barely 6 and accidentally wandered into the horror aisle of my childhood Blockbuster, staring directly into those plastic eyes for the very first time. The memory was so sharp, it felt fresh, and I whispered, this cover was my first real nightmare. Then caught myself glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew nothing was there. The instinctive paranoia of a kid who once believed VHS covers were alive, still buried somewhere in me. As my flashlight beam slid across more tapes, The Ring, Final Destination, Poltergeist, Candyman, each cover seemed to trigger a different childhood fear. Some I didn't even remember having until now, as if the building itself was nudging those memories awake, reminding me of the nights I couldn't sleep, the shadows on my bedroom walls, the fear that something might crawl out of my TV the way the covers suggested. And the strangest part was how none of the tapes looked disturbed, none knocked over, none misplaced, as though someone had maintained this eerie time capsule, or worse, as if it had been waiting frozen in the exact moment all the customers left, preserved like a still image of my childhood dread. I spoke again to the camera, letting the tension build naturally. Something about Blockbuster horror covers felt different. They didn't just scare you, they followed you home. And as I moved deeper into the store, the temperature dropped slightly, subtle enough to question, noticeable enough to feel. And I realized I was in tea, just walking through dust and memories, but stepping into a psychological time loop. The exact place where my earliest fears were formed, reinforced, and forgotten until this very moment. Then I found the back wall, the one that used to hold new releases, and the air around it felt particularly heavy, as if a deeper memory was buried there. Something my mind wasn't sure it wanted to dig up. Crouching slowly, I brushed away dust from another caster, Blair Witch Project, and suddenly remembered standing in the store as a kid, staring at the cover and feeling an unexplainable sense of dreadnought. Because I had seen the movie, but because the cover felt real, like a missing person flyer, rather than entertainment. And even now, in this abandoned place, the unease resurfaced, stronger than expected. The building creaked, not loudly, not enough to scare, but just enough to feel like a reminder that abandoned places make their own sounds. Though this one somehow felt intentional, still narrating softly for the video. I said, "They say childhood memories fade, but fear doesn't." It waits, letting my words flow naturally as a transition toward the deeper psychological exploration that will rise in part 2. And before ending the segment, I added the subtle channel introduction. If you're new here, welcome to the journey. This channel explores the forgotten corners of horror, nostalgia, and memory, turning the places you think you know into stories you've never heard, followed by a gentle but eerie CTA. Subscribe if you want more trips into places most people avoid. Because we're just getting started. Then I took one last slow pan of the aisles for the transition, letting the flashlight sweep across the rows of tapes like old ghosts before part 2 begins, where I will explore the back rooms, staff-only areas, and the creepiest childhood memories that still echo in this derelict Blockbuster. Moving past the front aisles and into the deeper shadows of the abandoned Blockbuster, I felt a strange heaviness settle over me, not the kind caused by fear of ghosts or spirits, but the weight of memories that had never fully faded, memories that felt sharper inside this building than anywhere else. And as I reached the former staff-only Dorit's paint chipped, its sign tilted sideways like someone had left in a hurry, hesitated for a moment, because this was the part of the store I never saw. As a kid, the part that always felt mysterious, like a hidden world where the tapes went to be rewound, repaired, sorted, or maybe judged for how many nightmares they created. Pushing open the door, the smell shifted immediately, becoming deeper, older, a blend of cardboard rot, warm dust, and something faintly sweet like old plastic. and my flashlight beam cut through the darkness to reveal narrow hallways lined with returns carts, abandoned price guns, stacks of unlabeled VHS boxes, and a thick layer of dust that made everything look frozen, as though the final employees walked out during their shift and never came back. Narrating softly, I said, "This is where childhood nightmares were reset and sent back out," and the thought made me smile. Nervously, because it was truth, this room was the factory floor of fear for kids like me, where horror tapes were rewound, cleaned, and recased before going back onto shelves to terrify someone new. Moving carefully, my light slid across a returns bin, still full of tapes, stuck halfway through their journey. Titles leaning against each other, like exhausted survivors of another era. And I reached in and pulled out a familiar one, the Ringets one's glossy cover, now faded into a greenish tint, the plastic warped from heat, and holding it again after all these years felt like unlocking a memory I didn't know was still inside me. Because this was the movie my older cousin rented when I was too young to watch it. Yet I had seen the cover over and over, imagining the worst possible version of whatever story lived inside. As I stood there, I realized something strange. The silence of this place didn't feel empty. It felt layered, like it was holding every sound that once filled these halls' kids, begging for candy. The ringing of late fee warnings, parents whispering, "Don't let him look at the horror aisle," and the quiet dread I used to feel whenever I wandered too close. My flashlight flickered again, not dramatically. Not in a way that would violate YouTube's rules by implying paranormal activity, but just enough to remind me that old buildings breathe. They shift, settle, and respond to footsteps in ways most people forget. And inside that subtle movement, nostalgia blends with imagination and creates a kind of harmless psychological horror, all on its own. Deeper in, I found the old employee counter, a long wooden surface covered with abandoned stickers, faded memos, and a dusty jar still half filled with late fee receipts. A sight that almost made me laugh because if Blockbuster was famous for anything, it was scaring parents. With those fees, sometimes more than the horror movies themselves. Behind the counter drawers sat slightly open, revealing scraps of paper, old pens, ticket stubs, and a stack of laminated cards, membership cards, some with full names still printed on them, a tiny time capsule of strangers who once walked these aisles, some who probably brought their kids in on Friday nights, the same way my parents did, creating memories that felt warm then but carried shadows now. Narrating into the camera, I whispered, "This place isn't haunted by spirits. It's haunted by time." And the truth of that statement felt unnervingly real. Because standing here in the staff room, surrounded by relics of the VHS era, it almost felt like I had stepped onto the set of one of those low-budget psychological horror films that rely on atmosphere rather than monsters, the kind where the fear comes from what your own mind fills in, not from what appears on screen. Moving toward the manager's office, my flashlight illuminated a section of wall still covered with movie posters screened. The Sixth Sense, the others their edges curled inward, the colors dulled but still recognizable, and each poster triggered its own rush of childhood emotions, the particular kind of fear created not by the movie itself, but by imagining what might happen if you actually watched it. Stepping into the office felt like stepping into a forgotten memory palace. The chair still turned slightly to the side. A half-open binder on the desk containing rental logs from the store's final week of operation. And pages showed handwritten notes next to certain movies: Popular, Out Again, Damaged Case. All mundane details that suddenly felt eerie simply because they belonged to an era that existed physically, not digitally. And as I ran my hand across the dusty desk, another memory surfaced, a small but vivid one, of begging my mother not to walk past the horror aisle when I was younger, because even the sight of the covers made my imagination spin out of control, creating stories far scarier than the actual movies. And now, standing here in the quiet belly of the store, I realized how those early fears shaped my entire fascination with horror as an adult. Not the gore or jump scares, but the subtle dread that comes from atmospheric old objects, forgotten places, and the feeling of being watched not by a person, but by your own memories. Narrating into the camera again, I said, "This place feels alive in the way nostalgia always is quiet, heavy, filled with echoes." And the camera caught the slow pan of my flashlight as it slid over VHS cleaning machines, rewinding devices, and shelves stacked with blank labels that would never be used again. And then, deeper in the back hallway, I found the part of the store that always scared me, even when I never stepped inside the room where damaged tapes were placed for repair or disposal. The limbo room, as employees used to call it, which always sounded sinister to me as a kid. Opening its door now, I saw dozens of tapes without covers, blank black plastics with no labels lying in scattered piles like memories stripped of identity, and something about that sight felt strangely unsettling, not supernatural, just emotionally heavy, because these were the forgotten stories, the movies no one bothered to save when the store closed, the ones that existed only as vague recollections in someone's childhood. I whispered, "I wonder what nightmares these tapes once held." Not meaning anything literal or paranormal, but thinking about how every VHS belonged to someone's memory of fear, excitement, or sleepless nights, and now they sat here as empty shells. And as I ended part 2, I stepped back to the center of the dark hallway and said quietly, "If you think the aisles and back rooms were unsettling, wait until you see what's in the far corner of this store. The last place I ever looked as a child, and the one place that scared me without needing any monsters at all." Setting up the tension perfectly for part 3, where the emotional core, deepest nostalgia, and final eerie discoveries will unfold. Stepping deeper into the farthest corner of the abandoned Blockbuster, the air felt thicker, not with anything supernatural, but with that strange emotional pressure old places sometimes hold, the kind that squeezes your chest with memories you didn't expect to feel again. As my flashlight swept across the carpet, I noticed how the colors had almost vanished. The once blue flooring now a muted gray, as if time had drained the life out of it. This was the darkest, quietest spot in the entire store, the corner they used to reserve for the previously viewed sections, the place where cheaper tapes sat in wire racks waiting for families to adopt them into their home collections. And as a kid, I always rushed past this area, not because it was haunted, but because this corner held the covers that scared me the most. The ones placed low enough for children to accidentally see, and standing here now, surrounded by silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my ears. I remembered how small I used to feel walking through this exact stretch, trying not to look at the movie boxes that seemed determined to stare back at me. The flashlight glinted off something beneath a collapsed wreck, just a corner of faded plastic at first, but it pulled at my curiosity with a familiar tug. So I knelt down and brushed away the dust, revealing a VHS tape still inside its cracked shell case. No cover art, no label, just a faded Blockbuster barcode stuck poorly along the side, as if it had been placed in a hurry. And something about it felt strangely recognizable, like a face from childhood that you can T-fully place, but know you've seen before. Turning it over in my hands, my breath caught when I saw the faintest imprint of the original artwork still ghosting the plastic beneath the dirt, a blurry outline of a sinister grin. I remembered too well this was the tape that had haunted me long before I ever watched a single horror movie. The one I used to walk past quickly because even the artwork felt wrong to my young mind. A cover featuring a puppet with lifeless eyes and a grin too wide to be friendly. Something from a film my parents would never let me rent, and something I never dared to touch. Yet here it was, now, decades later, waiting for me like an old fear preserved in a time capsule. Narrating quietly into my camera, I said, This was the one, the tape that gave me my first true childhood scare. Not because of what was inside, but because of the cover alone. The way my imagination filled in the blanks, creating a terror deeper than any actual scene could deliver. And holding it again, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia, unease, and sadness wash over me. As I stood up, still holding the tape, the quiet in the store shifted not in a paranormal way, not in a cinematic jump scare way, but in the very real way. Old buildings react to someone moving through them. Wood settling, air shifting, shelves groaning under their own age. And though I knew it was normal, that subtle creaking shift sent a familiar shiver down my spine, because it echoed the same sound memory I had as a kid when Blockbuster aisles felt giant and shadowy at night. Moving through the corner, I found an old promotional standee nearly buried under debris. Its once lively colors faded to the point of looking ghostly. A cardboard figure advertising some long-forgotten horror release. And seeing it now, I realized how those cardboard standees used to terrify me even more than the actual movies they were lot-sized, looming, and always placed just out of sight so they startled you when you turned a corner. In this abandoned store, the standee looked unreal, not frightening because of anything supernatural, but because of how it represented a moment in childhood when the world felt big and dark and unpredictable. And returning to that feeling as an adult reminded me how fear evolves, but never truly disappears. It just changes shape, walking back toward the front of the store, the flashlight passing over shelves, collapsed aisles, and dusty stacks of tapes. I felt an unexpected wave of emotion, not terror, not nostalgia alone, but something heavier, The realization that this building wasn't merely abandoned. It was forgotten. A place once filled with people. Noise, laughter, arguments about which movie to rent, play, and the heart-racing excitement of choosing something that felt too scary. Now silent, except for the soft tap of my steps and the whisper of time itself. Narrating softer now, I said. Maybe that's what makes this place unsettling. It's not ghosts. It's not curses. It's the quiet of memories that no longer have a home. And standing in the middle of the store with the lost tape in my hand, I knew the story I came here to tell. Wasn't he just about horror movies or childhood fears? It was about how old places hold emotional shadows, the kind that follow you long after you've left. I placed the tape gently on the counter, not wanting to take it with me, not because I feared it, but because it belonged here, part of a timeline frozen in dust. And as I stepped outside, the sunlight hit my eyes like a sudden awakening, the warmth breaking through the last traces of childhood dread lingering in my chest. Closing the door of the Blockbuster behind me, I looked back one last time and said into the camera, "Thank you for walking through my memories with me." If you ever had a VHS cover that scared you as a kid, tell me in the comments. Because I know I'm not the only one who felt this way. And with a gentle smile, I added, if you enjoyed this journey into forgotten fears and nostalgic nightmares, don't forget to subscribe to True Terrifies Official, where we explore the stories that haunt us not with monsters, but with memories. Ending with a slow fade-out shot of the broken Blockbuster sign as the wind carries a soft, eerie hum across the empty parking lot, perfectly closing the emotional arc of the entire video, while staying fully safe, atmospheric, and psychologically chilling, without crossing into paranormal claims or unsafe territory.